Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. In today's Tuner Diary episode, we'll be working with this first generation 3000 GT VR-4. This is what we refer to as a stockish 3000 GT, in that the only significant upgrades are to the fuel with a Walbro 450 LPH fuel pump, supplying Deechworks 550cc injectors. Fuel flow is regulated through an AEM fuel pressure regulator, and we've got AEM gauges for AFR and boost. However, everything else on the car is OEM stock components, including those TD04 9B turbos. Oftentimes we get customers with upgraded turbos, but not changes to the fuel supply to support them. In this case, we have plenty of fuel supply support for when the customer is ready to upgrade his turbos, and indeed he does plan for a single turbo conversion in the near future. And we're back at Remy's Rides, this time with a first generation 3000 GT VR-4. Remy's getting to work. We're doing the boost leak check right now to see if we find any holes in the system before we get out to the dyno this afternoon. We began working with this car through remote tuning to its home in New Jersey last month. With all that extra fuel available, but the ECU programmed on the stock tune, the car was running rich and would fall on its face before it could even reach 5,000 RPMs. We were able to get the injectors corrected in the calibration and get both the idle and the part throttle cruising portions of the tuning complete remotely. The customer had a business trip down to the Carolinas, so he wanted to take the opportunity to come a little further and bring the car to us in Atlanta so we could sit it on the dyno and get all the boost tuning complete. We were only going to have the car for about 7 hours total from start to finish, so it was going to be a fun challenge for Remy and myself. At first the car could barely hold down 6 pounds of pressure. Remy found a missing clamp on the turbo that was the source of most of that loss and was able to replace it. He hunted down and resolved a few more boost leaks, and we were able to hold good pressure. Our customer thought that he had the original Mitsubishi boost solenoid, but upon further inspection we found that it had been removed. In fact, there was no boost management system in place anywhere, whether manual or electronic. We made an adjustment and pulled a GoFastBits atomic boost controller off of another car and made it to the dyno in time. Now, if you've been following us for a while now, then you may recall a couple of years ago we worked with a bone stock 3000 GT VR-4. Knowing that the manufacturer almost always leaves a little bit of power on the table, our goal at that time was to see just how far we could push those OEM components. Now, most people who had dynoed their stock VR-4s were reporting anywhere from 240 to 260 or so all-wheel horsepower, which makes sense given that the 320 flywheel horsepower that Mitsubishi had advertised with the cars. At that time, we tweaked timing and fuel, and we were able to squeeze 284 all-wheel horsepower, though we were running out of injector duty cycle all the way to the limit at that time. So now, with another stockish VR-4, but bigger fuel injectors, the question would be, how much could we improve on that 284 horsepower number, and could we crack the 300 horsepower ceiling? But before we head off to the dyno, let's talk a little turbo physics. Over 15 years ago, a guy named Jeff Lucius did a tremendous amount of turbo research and shared it with the community. He noted that the 9Bs can flow a maximum of 275 CFM, or cubic feet per minute, at 15 psi. At this boost and flow rate, they run out of air at about 5,000 RPM. Now, if we up the boost to 20 psi, they actually run out of flow and we start to lose boost as early as 4,000 RPM. This is a significant limitation of the stock turbos. However, when they're paired with the stock fuel pump and the stock 360 injectors, they're actually well matched to each other. That is to say, as soon as you start to run out of flow from the turbos, you're also running out of injector duty cycle. If you do the math, taking that 275 CFM and multiply it by 0.60 to 0.65, you get between 261 and 282 maximum horsepower per turbo. With twin turbos, this results in a maximum of 330 to 357 horsepower at the flywheel. Hence, we can see where Mitsubishi advertised the car at 320 horsepower at the crank. This also gives us a good reference point as we attempt to reach 300 horsepower to the wheels. So it was off to the dyno at Countersteer, where Dylan got the car loaded up, strapped down, so that we could begin our work. Hello everybody, once again, Morgan from RacerX Performance Tuning, and we've got the first generation 3000 GT VR-4 here on the dyno at Countersteer. working through a few things, running a little bit rich, just doing our process. Again, this is a stock car for the most part. We've got fuel upgrades, but stock turbos. And so far, you know, for stock turbos, you know, getting in that 300 horsepower range is pretty good. So pretty satisfied so far. We're going to tweak some more things and see how far we can get this car. So we're pushing these 9Bs as hard as we can, but we're running out of room, really. I'm going to see what else we can do. See if we can get this girl up over that 300. Did beat my old record of 280 or 284, so up to 294, so beat that by 10. See if we can squeeze 6 more out of here. I don't know. Give it a shot. It's our practice to review the data between every run. After ruling out any knock events, we evaluate our fuel, timing, and boost tuning, adjust, and repeat. The 9B turbos showed a precipitous drop-off around 4,500 RPM, and we struggled to carry peak horsepower into the 5,500 to 6,500 RPM range as would be expected normally. Alright, so we're working, trying to get this out here a little bit higher. So raising the timing up a little bit. We got no knock in the last run. Fuel is pretty good. Turn the manual boost controller up a little bit more. So we will try to drop this calibration on here and see what we get out of this run. As it would turn out, luck was on our side. Just as we were nearing the end of our dyno time and in our final run, we were able to top 300 horsepower goal we had been reaching for, and ended up with a maximum of 308 all-wheel horsepower with an impressive 385 foot-pounds of torque. We had spent some time trading between boost and timing and just started to see some knock start to creep in. In retrospect, I think we could have improved our numbers with less boost and more timing, but we'll have an opportunity to revisit that and go even further with this car in the future. At the end of the day, we had a very happy customer loading the car back up on the trailer and heading back home to New Jersey. Okay guys, so time for a little bit of tuner diary here. You know, we talked about it earlier. We thought that this car was coming to us with the stock boost solenoid intact, which has been interesting to play with and see what we could do to extend the amount of boost wastegate duty cycle that we could possibly run. As it turned out, there was no stock boost solenoid, there was no manual boost controller, there was actually no boost controller at all. So we didn't get to play with this, but I did want to just kind of share what the experience would be like had we been able to work with the stock solenoid, or even a 3-port boost solenoid had one been installed. So every engine management system has their own way of managing wastegate duty cycle, and wastegate duty cycle is the key to managing boost, essentially. So each one has their own way of doing it, but they generally follow about the same principle, and this is again one of those aspects that we refer to as the tuning process, because you couldn't necessarily copy this from one car to another and know that it would be the same result. So I'll explain like this. So in ECU flash for a Chrome ECU, you have a section called Turbo, and here we're basically going to work with essentially 5 tables. There's actually a little bit more that we will work with when all is said and done, but we're going to work with the target engine load table A for the high octane, and load table B, oops, that by mistake, load table B also for high octane. We'll go back and talk about the low octane tables in a minute. These two tables essentially can be the same. They can be different if you decide to use a switch point, but we'll save that for another day. We will make these the same and not use any switch point in this calibration. The other tables are going to include the base wastegate duty cycle high octane table. That's going to be the main table we're going to work off of. The load error correction table, which is going to be part of our sort of a closed loop fashion of managing the wastegate duty cycle above or below our target. And then finally, we'll also work with the boost load offset, which is a factor that we use to get beyond the 1 byte limitation and allow us to get our boost ranges up to 320. Now the way you would do this is first you would just kind of go in here, since you're in the tuning process, you don't want any correction at this point for this engine management system. So we'll go in here, just kind of copy all the values in the correction and then set them all to 0, because we'll have no correction at all while we're trying to figure out where we're going to be. The next thing to do is to go into the base wastegate duty cycle high octane table, and this is the amount of wastegate duty cycle that is run. When you're running at 100% wastegate duty cycle, you're using all the ability of the turbo that is available through the amount of the duty cycle that your boost solenoid can manage. And if you're using anything less than that, then we're saying we're going to bleed off some of this and allow the wastegate to open up. So this is actually Mitsubishi's determination of what amount of wastegate duty cycle per RPM is appropriate for those for the stock setup. And what you do is you go in and you start to actually determine what this will be for your setup. So we kind of start off with just say we'll run at 50% duty cycle, set them all to 50% duty cycle. And so this means that every RPM range we're going to run half the duty cycle that's available for us to manage. What you do is you go and you just take this value, so like it is, and you go and you make a run. Okay, do a wide open throttle pull. Once you've completed that pull, what you want to do is look through the data and do a little bit of an evaluation. You want to look for across each of these RPM ranges, you want to see if, one, of course, if you had any knock, and if no knock, that's great. If you had knocked, we're going to talk about what to do at that point in time. And you're also going to record, you know, how much boost pressure you're able to get. There's various ways of doing that. If you have a map sensor that's wired in, that's kind of idyllic. If not, though, we oftentimes would use the 2 byte boost value that we can get out of EvoScan. So you go in and make a little spreadsheet like this, or just write it on paper and say how much 2 byte load was I able to get up to, and what wastegate duty cycle was I at. I oftentimes record the 2 byte airflow as well, or any other factors, just to kind of factor those in. But main thing you're looking for is what your 2 byte load value is, and record that. Then go back and flip back over to your ECUs, and then if there was no knock, and we would then go ahead and proceed to up these values to the next, maybe go up to 10, we'll go up to 60. Go back and do another run. And we'll go back and evaluate again. And this time we're looking, once again, as always, look to see if we've got knock, but also to see if our engine load, our 2 byte load, has increased during that RPM range. If either of those things has changed, that is to say, if we started to get knock, or we found out that we're no longer maximizing or getting any higher boost, any load recorded, then that is the point at which we've reached, you know, essentially sort of like an MBT version of this boost management. We've reached the maximum amount of wastegate duty cycle that we can run at that RPM range. In fact, we've maximized. We know the most duty cycle we can run, and we should be running that amount of duty cycle where possible. So while you may be able to run, you know, maybe 60, 70, 80, 100 down here in the lower values, you may find that at 4,000, 5,000, you may be able to run 60, 70, 80% of the duty cycle. Anyway, once you found out where if your stopping point is, I'll go back 10 off. So let's say if at 3,000 RPM we found out that 60 was too much. Okay, we either started getting some knock, or we ran out of our ability to increase our 2 byte load. So I will just back this off now and say, okay, it's 50, and I'll go ahead and put that in my spreadsheet that we had here and just mark it off as that's done. So I'm no longer going to be increasing that one. I'm going to go and continue to go back though and increase the others. So now everybody else will go up to 70, you know, and continue this process along until each one of these rows has reached their maximum amount of wastegate duty cycle that could be run. Once done, Now you've got your base wastegate duty cycle high octane table completed. And as I mentioned, you're able to run this amount of duty cycle at this RPM rate and maximize the amount of boost that you're going to be able to get across the power band for your car. So once you've completed that process of determining your maximum wastegate duty cycle per RPM range, and if you use the spreadsheet or other means, paper or whatever, to record the load, you can then go back into your target engine load tables and target those load values that you recorded for the wastegate duty cycle that you've determined. All right, so it's easy. Once you've got that done, you're able to just map these values that you recorded to the amount of engine load that you will target, and you should be pretty much right on point. This much wastegate duty cycle is going to equal this much engine load, or boost, essentially, that we were looking for. And we talked about it earlier, this load offset. So the maximum amount that you can put into one of these given cells, let's say at 4500, you wanted to run 250 load, right? But if you try to put 250 into the table, you're going to see that it's only going to max out at 159. That's the single byte limitation of this table. And this is where this other table comes into handy. You can add this amount to whatever you have over here, and it's going to add it to all of the rows, though. So you need to make sure that you start off with your lowest value. So we ended up with 80 as our lowest value of load that we would run. Maybe I'll go over here and I'll put 80 in here. Oh, sorry. 80 into this table, and then I can subtract 80 from everybody over here. With the add to data minus 80. And now this table plus this table would be the load. So if we needed to get above 159, we can combine these two tables together to reach those upper boost values. So once you've done your target engine load, high octane tables, you can take these same values and work for your low octane tables, subtracting obviously a significant amount so that the interpolation can happen in the event that they were not, and it will target lower engine loads. But most importantly here, now you can go back and take your error correction table that you took out of the equation before, go back in and you can replace all the values that you had here previously, or manipulate these as you see fit. To basically, if you have your load is below your target, it's going to add a certain percentage of duty cycle. And of course, if your load is above your target, you want to be very aggressive in reducing that percentage of duty cycle so that you don't overshoot your boost. And that's it.